Hey everyone, it's Mr. Drake. We are going to continue our study of Rome by talking about the Roman Republic. Now, generally, the beginning of the Roman Republic is dated to 509 BC, because that's when the Romans overpowered the Etruscans. And you've already read about the Etruscans and their influence on that area, the Italian peninsula. Also, the Greeks had moved west over the Adriatic Sea and had settled in the southern part of the Italian peninsula. The Romans overran and took over and pushed out those peoples and took over the Italian peninsula and set up a government called a republic. A republic is a government where the people select some government officials. Think of it almost like a combination between representation and public. So if you put those two words together, you end up with republic, and that the public has representation in the government. Now, in the Roman Republic, there were two classes of people. There's the upper class and there's everyone else. And the upper class was known as the patricians, and everyone else, the artisans, the farmers, the merchants, were known as the plebeians. Now, government, the laws, were made by the Senate. The Senate consisted of 300 people who were all patricians, and they were all appointed for life. So once they were appointed to the Senate, they held that job until they died or wanted to give it up. And the Senate, from the patricians, would appoint two people known as consuls. And consuls were people who were sort of in charge of the army and oversaw the Senate. But you may notice the plebeians, the lower class, they don't really have any say at this point. It's all the upper class. The patricians have all the power in the government. Now, eventually, the plebeians begin to gain rights and gain some influence, and there were two big breakthroughs that they made. The first one is they actually got the Senate to write down what the laws were, and they were written down on 12 tablets and displayed in the marketplace in Rome. And the picture there are replicas. The original tablets don't endure to today. No one knows exactly what happened to them. But on the 12 tables, is what it was called, the laws of the Roman Republic were written down. And the plebeians had that done because they said, well, how are we supposed to know what the laws are if they're not written down anywhere? They need to be, as it were, set in stone so that people know what they should do and what's legal and what's not legal. So they got that accomplished. They also began to elect their own officials, who were called tribunes. And the tribunes had the power to veto or overrule any law the Senate passed that wasn't good for the plebeians. So the tribunes sort of protected the plebeians. They protected the lower class. And I know a lot of times in this class you've probably thought to yourself, why do I care about this stuff? All of these people are dead. Well, what the plebeians were able to do by checking the power of the government and limiting the power of the government, it inspired the people who wrote the U.S. Constitution. And the limits that the government has now, a lot of those are inspired by the Roman Republic. And as a result, your rights are guaranteed, and the government has limitations on what they can and can't do. And that comes from the Romans, so you can thank them for that. Now, as the Roman Republic began to expand and take over the rest of the Italian peninsula and branch out into the Mediterranean Sea, they found themselves a bit of a rival, and that rival is Carthage, which is actually located in northern Africa. And over the course of about 120 years, Rome and Carthage fought a series of 3 wars against each other for control of this whole region around the Mediterranean Sea. And those wars are known as the Punic Wars. Now, Carthage never actually defeated Rome. I guess you could say that Rome's record in the Punic Wars was 2 wins, no losses, and 1 tie. In the first Punic War, Rome beat Carthage, and they took over the 3 biggest islands in the Mediterranean Sea, Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily, which you can see there on the map. The second Punic War was a little bit more of a draw. The Romans expected that the Carthaginians would just come across the Mediterranean Sea and attack Rome directly. Instead, the general Hannibal, who you see there riding an elephant in that bottom picture, decided to surprise the Romans with a backdoor attack. So he went west through Africa, came up through Spain, see where Spain and Africa almost touch there. He comes all the way around and crosses the mountains known as the Alps, which are the mountains that separate Italy from the rest of Europe. And he went over the mountains with a huge army and several dozen elephants that he used to get over this really rough terrain and scare the bejesus out of the people that he was fighting. If you saw a bunch of elephants charging towards you, you would probably turn tail and run. Now, after he gets over the Alps, the Romans are totally caught off guard and surprised, and Hannibal wins numerous battles over the next few years, but he's never actually able to take Rome. So Rome manages to survive. They're not defeated by Carthage. And then in the Third Punic War, several years later, the Romans go into Carthage, completely tear it asunder, kill or enslave the people who they had not killed in the city's invasion, and ends up taking all of their land. So at this point, Carthage sort of declines, and Rome begins to branch out all over the Mediterranean Sea. They're not just limited to Italy at this point. They start taking other stuff over too. And with Rome's win in the Punic Wars begins their policy of imperialism. The root of imperialism is empire, and this is where they begin to take control of foreign lands and peoples. And eventually, they would take all of that stuff you see on the map there that's colored. They went from Spain all the way down to Egypt. They went across Greece, took over that area after it had been weakened after the Peloponnesian Wars. They take over Asia Minor, and they have a huge swath of land that they control. They were actually pretty nice overlords. The general rule was Rome would take you over. You had to pay taxes to Rome, to the government. You had to supply men for the army, and in return, you were allowed to keep your customs and your traditions, your language, your currency, and stuff like that. Now, this huge bit of land that Rome took over, it results in immense wealth because of those areas are now open for trading with Rome, and they can make money off them that way. They enslaved a lot of people as they fought wars, so you had this huge slave class. But at the same time, you have a lot of unhappiness in the lower classes because all of this wealth coming from other places is in turn causing people in Rome to lose money because they can't sell their stuff for as much as they could before. For example, if you've got a wheat trader in Italy, in Rome, they were hurt because people, say, in Asia Minor could sell their wheat made with slave labor for much less, and it would drive the price of the Italian farmer's wheat down. So you start to see the lower classes become very unhappy. You begin to see, angry mobs of people marching on the government. You start to see slave revolts, and so things get really, really tense, and that's going to lead to the downfall of the Roman Republic, which we'll talk about later. Now, as for where we're going from here in our study of Rome, our next video is going to be about Julius Caesar and the Roman Empire. And in class, you should continue working on your projects. In honors, you're already working on your own flipped videos. Standard students, you are going to begin a project about Roman emperors here in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, be sure to keep up with the important terms from this video. Know what those are, keep up with all of your assignments in class, and as always, ask your teacher if you have any questions. Cheers!